So we are at oil and gas accounting, and the book goes into a lot of explanation on full cost accounting, successful efforts. What's all this about? Part of why we go over this is to show how politics and the economy plays into accounting standards, and parts just to give you a little understanding of how oil and gas works. Okay, so first of all, oil and gas, you have to find it, you have to drill it, it's a lot of work. And generally there's two different types of companies that do it. There's the small ones that probably would have one well going at a time, or maybe a couple of parcels. And then there's the really large companies that have bunches of wells going at a time. They've got a bunch of different projects. With the larger companies, if one project doesn't work, then chances are the others are, and so that's just the way the industry works. About 1 in 30 new oil fields are commercially viable. So there's a lot of looking around before you actually get to one that works. And so the accounting kind of reflects that. Okay, so this would be what the large companies like to do. This is called successful efforts accounting for oil and gas. So what they do is, here we've got oil extracted and sold, okay? So it's going to take them a couple of years to find it on this particular project. And so year 1, year 2, there's no sales on this. Year 3, they start selling some oil. But in years 1 and 2, they have the exploration and drilling costs. A bunch of others too, but we'll keep it simple. And so what they tend to do, the large companies, is they just expense these. So they would, for this project, show negative 100,000 on their income statement because they just expense all the exploration and drilling costs. Same for year 2. Then, when it finally comes in year 3, then they have the drilling costs for that year. Those are expensed as the others were, and they show their net income. Now, for a big company, this is no big deal because this is just one project. So, and they've got different projects at different stages. So their net income is not going to be fluctuating a whole lot just because they're taking a few losses here. Okay, they're taking the expenses on these wells. So anyway, the large firms have a lot of wells going on at the same time, and that's how they like to do their accounting. Now, if you were a small firm, this would just not work so well because you would have, you'd be showing an income statement that would be pretty bad for the first two years, and then it would be okay for the third year. And if that's your only project, it makes you look like you have sort of an erratic income flow. So the small companies do what's called full cost accounting. And they assume that the cost of all the unsuccessful wells are part of the cost of getting to the successful one. So they capitalize those costs. So rather than, here's our exploration and drilling costs, they're going to be capitalizing them. So it's not going to be showing up as a negative on their income statement for each year. So they'd be capitalized, and then when finally they get, it works, then they would take all of those against their income once the well comes in. Okay, so full cost accounting, that's the small firms capitalize the costs of both the successful and the unsuccessful wells. All right, so why do we bother to go into all of this? Well, back in the 70s, the SEC decided that they were going to simplify the accounting for oil and gas. And so they decided that they would, they wanted to, what do they call, reduce the diversity in accounting practices. So they tell FASB, oh, FASB, get it down so we're just using, one way of doing this. So FASB looked at it, and to simplify, it would require to use successful efforts or full costing, but not both. And so in 1977, they issued a statement that said, yes, you must use successful efforts. Needless to say, this makes the big firms very happy, but the small firms are very unhappy. And so the small companies protested. They threatened to just stop doing their exploration altogether, which would mean there would be less oil production, just to avoid the earnings volatility. And then they went to Congress and the Department of Energy to lobby to have this policy not come in, this new standard. So the Department of Energy believed that the small firms would be hurt by this. They thought they would reduce production, which is not what they wanted. And so the Department of Energy starts lobbying for the small firms. The Department of Justice also gets involved, and they ask the SEC to postpone this regulation. Okay, so what is going on here? So under pressure, what happens, let's get to what happens. Under pressure, FASB, the SEC issues a statement, first of all, saying it was okay to use full cost accounting after all. And so at that point, FASB's in a very difficult situation because, so they have to suspend certain accounting requirements for oil and gas, and they basically allow both methods. So much for simplification. So the SEC told FASB to reduce the diversity. FASB did that. And then after the pressure, the SEC allows both methods. Okay, so why? What's going on here that makes all of this, what's the situation? Let's take a look at what was going on. You weren't around, most of you probably, for this. But what you had was basically the Arab oil embargo, where OPEC had cut shipments to the United States because of our involvement with Israel in the Yom Kippur War. So basically, October 73, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. Russia sent arms to Egypt and Syria. We support Israel on it, and so it was just a big mess. And so in retaliation, OPEC, the organization, they decreased the oil production and imposed an embargo on shipments to both the U.S. and the Netherlands, who were also supporting Israel. So the war ended late October, the crisis kept going. So the impact on the U.S. was really high gas prices, much higher than they had been. I have a little picture of that here. Okay, so here's what happened in, this is what happened to gas prices. And then this is what it looked like. There were huge gas lines at the pumps, no gas. My husband's uncle, who was he was an insurance executive, he got in a fist fight in one of these lines because someone cut in front of him in the lines to get gas. People would spend all day just trying to get gas. So that was the situation. And so if you put all of this in perspective, when the small wildcatters basically said, oh yeah, we're not going to explore, we're going to cut our exploration, which means they're cutting production of oil. That's not what the Department of Energy, it's not what anybody wanted to see at this point in time. So accounting does not exist in a vacuum, I guess is the big message here.